Hi there, my name is Dave Fawcett and I'm a PE teacher at Brookfield Community School in Southampton. I'm also a learning innovator, looking at teaching and learning within our school. You can catch me on Twitter at davidfawcett27. I'm going to talk to you about literacy in PE and some ideas to try and develop it within our subject. At our school we did a big drive looking at literacy across all the curriculum areas. And we had a really good inset day looking at ways that we in PE could try and make the literacy element less of an add-on but more part of the everyday practice and at the core of what we're doing in our lessons. After that I went onto Twitter and collaborated with a number of PE teachers on Twitter and came up with a blog which has got about 50 different ideas. A lot of them crowdsourced, a lot of them the stuff that we do here at Brookfield Community School. It's been a great success actually. And if you want to have a look at it, there's a link on there at the top for you to go to, or you can just go to my Twitter profile and click on my blog and it's on there as well. What I'm going to do today is just talk through some of the ideas off of the blog and some ideas about literacy in PE and what you could do to, like I said, make literacy less of an add-on but more through the core of what we do within our lessons. What I'm going to do is split up into 3 different sections. The first thing, I'm going to look at theory lessons. Literacy obviously very easy to put into your theory lessons, but I'm going to be talking about how, as I said, to make it more of a part of the activity that you do in your lesson, more part of the learning in your lessons rather than an add-on. I'm then going to look in the second bit, looking at how we can do it in practical, and then the third thing, I'm going to try and show you how to make the PE department the hub and the focus, the flagship department in your school for literacy, and some ideas that we've done at our school and some other schools have been doing as well. The first thing you can do in your lessons, in your theory lessons, is a task called Facts in Fiction. It's an absolutely fantastic task. It demonstrates deep learning, it applies lots of facts and content in a more interesting way than just doing exam questions or just copying out definitions. And if you, somebody who knows a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy or Solo taxonomy, it gets students away from just doing defining and remembering and listing things. It gets them up the top end of the thinking taxonomies and learning taxonomies and tries to get them towards explaining, apply and create. Now, as you can guess, the name Facts in Fiction, it's very simple. In our topic, in our subject, we do have lots of individual facts that we need to cover. Students need to learn definitions. What will you do with a Facts in Fiction task is you pick a topic as the one you're going to be using it in. For example, you could look at physiology, muscular system, or skeletal system, or cardiovascular system, and so on. In your lessons, you then teach it the normal way that you normally would do, okay? And you cover all the facts and the content that you need to do. You pick up all the specific terminology and keywords and definitions, and then for the very final task that you give your students in that lesson, instead of doing exam questions or instead of doing just copying out definitions as I said before, you can set yourself a challenging task by writing yourself an opening part of a fictional story. Now, this is a fictional story that I've written for the skeletal system. So in my lesson, I taught, as I said, all the facts about the skeletal system. Students had loads of activities, and then right at the very end, we started this activity called a Facts in Fiction task, and the students then finished it off for homework. Now, the first bit, as I said, is you create your story. And I talked about a story about, it's the day before your PE exam. The character that you are in the story is about to sort of relax, maybe do a bit of revision later on, and then you get contacted by one of your friends called Dan, who in your lesson doesn't really listen to much, and he wants to come around your house and do a bit of revision. You're a little bit reluctant, but unfortunately Dan knocks at your door about 10 minutes later, and he sits in front of you and pretty much says he can't remember anything about the skeletal system, and that's where it's left as a cliffhanger. Your task then is to finish off the story. Now you can write it as either a script or actually as a story, but then you need to go on and explain to Dan about the skeletal system, and every time that you talk about a fact or a piece of information about the skeletal system, you underline it, so it's very visible to me, the teacher, to see that you're including all those bits of information. Underneath, with the ticks on the side, you also put down the key specific terminology, the points, the key facts of that particular topic that you want students to include inside their Facts in Fiction task. So I've got down there that I want the students to include the function of the skeleton, different types of bones, categories of joints, explain the different connective tissues, and talk about the skeleton and its role of the various types of movements. Students then, as I said, carry on from that story and try and really make it interesting and develop the story, add a bit of humour in there, develop their use of connectives and the way they use sentence starters and things like that, and obviously try and write in a very creative way, but at the same time including all the facts on my topic. Now this is an example that one of my students did. This is from a muscular system fact and fiction task, and as you can see, the students carried on the story for that particular task, and they've underlined all the key words that I've asked them to include. For instance, growth, repair, involuntary muscles, adduction, abduction. So it's all there for the teacher to read through and check that the information's there. But then it's much more interesting way of obviously reading that information than doing an exam question, because students have to really try and explain it. And especially when you've got a fictitious character like Dan in your story where you've got to try and explain it to them, you've then got to think about how you're going to do that. So it's a really, really phenomenal way of developing literacy in your lessons. The second way I'm going to talk about is something called critique. Now this is probably the best thing I've done in my teaching over the last couple of years, and it's a way of getting students to really act upon the feedback on extended pieces of writing and to make that writing a lot better. By obviously doing this sort of assessment for learning, peer assessment, or critique as I call it, it gets students obviously to develop their understanding of the content, and also you can actually look at the process of writing as you go through it as well. Now what I do is I set my students an extended piece of writing that they do in my GCSE classes. I give the example of the latest one and our latest project is I got our students to write a newspaper article which talked about how sponsorship, role models, how ICT, science and sport and so on all link to cycling, and students had to argue the case in this article about obviously why cycling is a great ambassador for those particular topics that we were covering in our lessons. Now the first thing you need to do is you need to model a piece of work that you are asking students to create. Now either you can write an article yourself, which is probably a better way of doing it, so students can actually see a real life example, or what I did is I got a load of articles, various different ones which students in my class we analysed and picked apart. We pulled out key things which you need to do to write a perfect article. As we did that, we created a success criteria, and we wrote down all the things which make a good article, and students obviously wrote those things down, and we said we need to include those things when we actually go and do our extended task, and then students went off and created their first draft of their article. When they finished that, they brought it back to the lesson, and I ran for a whole lesson a formal critique lesson. Now I started off by getting one student's piece of work who kindly gave it to me a couple of days before, and in front of the whole class we dissected that piece of work, and we broke down how the student did, how they've written it, what good things they did in each paragraph, how many quotes they used, the content that they used for the particular topic we're covering, and so on. So I've modelled how it is to develop that piece of writing. Now the students then, after me modelling it, went off and they then critiqued each other's pieces of work. They were giving lots of feedback, they were using specific terminology that we talked about, and they then obviously gave those bits of feedback back to their partner, and the partner went away and did a redraft or draft 2. About a week later they brought it back, and then students obviously went through the same process again, and we critiqued the piece of work again and gave specific feedback so students can improve it. Now there are 3 rules that you need to do when doing critique, and then one little protocol. The first rule is be kind. Now the feedback that we try and get our students to do needs to be helpful. There's no personal comments, no sarcasm, because that's not talking about the work, that's making comments to the person. It needs to be specific as well, so I actually banned lots of words in a lesson like it's good, I like it, it's okay, and students weren't allowed to use that when they were giving the feedback to each other, because it's just a waste of time. Telling somebody that their work isn't very good isn't actually specific enough, and students don't know where they need to improve their piece of work. And I also asked students to use the vocab that we used from our model at the very start, from our success criteria, to talk about it. So a student then, in our lesson, we're actually doing things like in your 3rd paragraph, on the 2nd line, I really like the way it used the quotation, but make sure you reference it properly. So little things like that, so the student knew exactly what it was and needs to go away and improve. And lastly, it needs to be helpful. If the comments that students are writing in the critique session don't actually benefit the learning of that individual or the whole class, then it's not really worth it. So we ask students, don't do any comments like that. It needs to actually help the benefit of the work. And lastly, a little protocol at the bottom, hard on content, soft at people. Now the thing that we do to begin with, like I said, the first time that I do a critique session, I actually give an in-depth critique. And with the students, I model that bit of work and we critique it together, and I ask students to help me pick it apart. Now, you make it very specific. So for this piece of work, the article, we just focused on the first paragraph to begin with. Then we looked at the 2nd paragraph, then the 3rd paragraph, and so on. We then started looking at how they include all the content and started analysing that. Then we started using their use of quotations and have they got lots of things in there, actual facts and information that they've got from interviews or from other sources. So you break it down, so students are actually learning the process of the writing as they go. And like I said, after I've done my in-depth critique to the whole class, students have seen what a good model of doing a critique is. They then went off and critiqued each other's work. The other one you can do is a gallery critique, and that's where students bring their work in, probably the second critique session you do, and you put all their work up on the side, and students go around and put post-it notes or feedback sheets underneath the bits of work. And again, you may want to structure that by saying, first of all, walk around in silence, and I just want you to read the first paragraph of a couple of bits of work and write down some feedback or critique on that. And then you may say, go around on your second round and look at another 2 bits of work and check to see if they've got the GCSE content in there. So they're looking for specific things and giving specific feedback. The next thing you can do in your theory lessons is actually develop your use of articles in the lesson. I'm getting quite good now, getting away from all the textbooks in our lessons. We'll use them obviously to gather bits of information to kind of get our fundamental knowledge of each topic, but then I really try and look for articles which link to the things that we've been talking about in our theory lessons, so students can actually draw upon authentic examples and actually bridge the gap between the content I've just taught them and real life examples. In our recent project, like I said, we're looking at media, we're looking at sponsorship, we're looking at science and sport, and we taught all the things obviously using the textbooks, but then we got loads of articles out and asked students to analyse these articles and actually unpick them. We actually put all of the articles that we used in our project up on our Brookfield Cycling Project blogspot, so please have a little visit on there if you want to have a look to see some of the articles we used. They're phenomenal. And like I said, students got a real understanding, a better understanding of how actually the stuff that I was teaching them actually worked in sport, and all the quotes, all the scientific examples, all the stories that the reporters are talking about really bridged that gap, and students pulled out a lot of information from it and really learned a lot more, and it really bridged that knowledge. Another way you can do, or the final way you can do for your theory lessons, is for the long answer questions. In our exam paper we have 8-mark questions. I have colleagues that do AS and they have 20-mark questions, but historically, a lot of students find it very difficult to answer those questions without waffling or including 8 different points which don't link together and so on. So we use what we call an idea writing frame, and it stands for identify, describe, explain and apply. There's also another one which you can use. Our school is quite heavy on literacy, and we talk about something called PED, which is point, evidence, explain and develop. We stick with idea for PE, it's much easier. Like I said, it's a writing frame. So what I get students to do is, in the 8-mark question, normally there may be a question such as, explain how a certain person can use principles of training in their sport. Now the exam asks you, or requires students to talk about 3 different principles of training. So we ask these students to do this process for each principle one at a time and do it 2 or 3 times. So for the first thing, a student may turn around and talk about specificity. So in the top box in topic 1, they write specificity. Then it says describe that particular thing. So then obviously in that little box there, then describe what specificity is, given the proper example, GCSE word perfect definition. In step 3, explain it. So we then ask students to explain what specificity is in their own words to show the examiner they actually understand what it's about. And right at the bottom, we then ask them to apply it to sport or to the question that's been given to them. So if it's talking about a rugby player, then they can actually now apply specificity to a rugby player. When students actually fill that in, that's what it looks like. So all the boxes are filled in, and if you take them out and merge them together, at the bottom, this is what their final answer would actually read. And we ask students to do this another time, and maybe one more time for another thing. So they may do progression next, and they may do overload for the third one, and briefly talk about that. Now it takes a bit of time, but students got really good at it, and the quality of their extended writing and the quality in their 8-mark questions has gone through the roof with our students. So it's a really excellent way of developing the way that students structure their 8-mark or even 20-mark questions. I'm going to talk about literacy in practical lessons now. We do it all the time, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, but here's just a way of trying to refine it and try and pull out the essence of literacy a little bit better. Now, the first one is your verbal literacy. Now, students in your lesson give a lot of assessment for learning, a lot of feedback, a lot of peer assessment and so on. We at Brookfield try and develop that verbal literacy with students and try and make the feedback they give a lot clearer and a lot more precise, and we call it feedback with a purpose. Now we've got these little feedback sheets here, and we actually teach students very early on how to give correct feedback. Now I know a lot of teachers do that, but then we take it a step further. So after we've talked about what good feedback is, what you should be saying, for each particular sport, kind of the key words you should be talking about to make it specific to that sport, we then get students to go off and give feedback to each other for particular activities. We then send out 2 things. The first thing is called a learning spy. It could be your non-doer in the lesson, Okay, very, very good for them. Or it could be just a set of students in your group who you actually send out. Now they go out with clipboards and pens, and when the people are giving students in your are giving feedback in your class, these guys go around with the clipboard and a pen, or maybe an iPad to video this, and they actually start collecting evidence or comments of people actually giving specific or feedback with purpose to each other. So if they hear a couple of students giving some good feedback to each other, where it's very specific, it's very clear, very precise, very helpful, they then write that down. If they go to another group and hear that students are giving feedback which isn't so good, they then write that down as well. After the first round, they come back to the board and they copy up all their quotes onto the board, half are good, half are bad, and then we get the whole class round again and we discuss, and the learning spies talk through things that they've heard and things that need to be improved. They then go off and give more feedback to each other again, and the learning spies go out for a second run and actually get some more information. Hopefully they'll have less bad stuff and more good stuff on there, and then you can reflect on that again at the end of your lesson. But it's a phenomenal way of collecting evidence, and students are on their toes because they know other students are actually looking for them to give that effective feedback. The last one's called a feedback triad, and when students are given feedback, we get them to work in threes. One's giving the feedback, one is receiving the feedback, and the other one, as I said before, like a learning spy, is recording the feedback. Either by, the way that we do it is just to simply note down on paper what's been said, or on whiteboards what's been said. Now that's really, really good, because after you've done that, we can come back as a whole class and the people can talk about what type of feedback was given. So the third person, the recorder, can say, well, the feedback that was given in our group was this, this and this, and we can actually reflect on it and evaluate it. Then they can go back out again and rotate their roles, and when they're given some more feedback, a different person's giving the feedback, a different person's receiving it, and another person's recording it, and then again we can evaluate and analyse the quality of the feedback that's been given. In our lessons as well, another thing we're doing is developing our literacy keywords. So we go through our particular sports and our particular schemes of work that we're teaching, and we actually pull out the specific terminologies and the keywords that students need to use. We then, on our board, have our learning objectives, success criteria and so on, but we have the keywords on the right hand side, and we encourage students in our lessons to talk through these keywords and demonstrate they can understand what they mean, the specific terminology we're talking about. We ask them when they're giving feedback to use these keywords. When they're answering questions, we're asking them to use these keywords as well, and all the time we're trying to develop their understanding and develop their vocabulary. And for PE, making it very specific so students can get into year 8, 9, 10, 11 and be able to actually then turn around and actually give clear, concise, sport-specific feedback to you, or use them in discussions, or sport-specific question and answers, that sort of thing in your lessons. Again, it really, really encourages them to develop their terminology. The last thing I'm going to talk about is actually how you can make the PE department the literacy department in your school, and it's very simple. You can develop yourself a sports media team. Now at Brookfield, for a couple of years, we had a Brookfield sports media team, and they went out and created newspapers for our school and distributed them around our tutor groups, outside the sports hall and so on. What we did for this is we had a team of students from all different year groups, and we all got together once a week. We assigned them to go and follow a fixture or a club, or talk about an upcoming event that was coming on within the sports department, or maybe an initiative that we were running, and the editor would send out the journalist to each of these fixtures or events. They then obviously come back after they've written a report, and as a group or a sports team, we would then write up our newspaper. The editor and deputy editor would check them through, check for grammar and that sort of thing. We'd evaluate and feedback on each other's work, we'd critique it, and then students then put together our newspaper. Unfortunately, because of budget cuts and so on, we haven't been able to obviously to photocopy and distribute them anymore, so it kind of stopped about a year and a bit ago. A way to combat that we're looking at now, as you can see from Westfield PE department on the right hand side there, is actually maybe we develop ourselves our own sports media blog, where again we get our sports media team together again, they go around and cover all the fixtures, and then we blog it up onto the school site. We can then tweet it out, we can put a link onto our school website, or put a link onto our VLE. And again, this sports media team, this literacy team that you're developing with students, can change every couple of months. You can enlist new people as part of it. You can change the roles out, so you have new editors each time. And again, it's just a real good way of developing literacy skills within a number of students within your group. And again, getting your students within the rest of your school to read that blog or to read the newspaper, again, it's a phenomenal way to develop the reading skills within your students in your lessons. Hopefully you found some of those ideas interesting. As I said, you can follow me at davidfawcett27 on Twitter. If you go to my profile, there's a link to my blog and the Literacy and PE blog that's on there. There's about 50 different ideas that you can use. Tweet me if you have any ideas or any questions, or if you're using any things in your lessons. It'd be great to see if we can actually showcase the literacy and PE work that's going on at the moment. Thank you.